Okay, so we're going to continue talking about oil paints, basically. So during this early time when artists first discovered oil paints, they were still working on wood panels covered with smooth layers of gesso. And they had not started using canvas as a support yet. They just haven't discovered canvas yet. They were still painting on panel, which was something that was kind of a tradition left over from the older tradition of tempera painting. And of course, like we mentioned earlier, tempera will easily crack, so it required a stiff support. And so the early oil paintings actually still use a stiff support, just kind of left over from tempera painting techniques. So we'll take a look at Jan van Eyck's Madonna and Child with the Chancellor roll-in. So it's gesso-covered wood panel. And he used glaze, or a transparent film of color. So he built the oil color up in glazes. So he thinned it down with turpentine and really made it thinner, and then used different layers of paint to create glazes and color. And then he added a lot of refined details and textures. So here it is, Jan van Eyck's Madonna and Child. It's from 1433. through 34, oil and tempera on panel. So this is an early oil painting. And this is an example of the mastery of the oil technique. He achieved a lot of glowing jewel-like surfaces that remain amazingly fresh and even up until this day. And he painted it on a small gesso-covered wood panel. And so he began with a brush drawing in tempera. And then he proceeded with thin layers of oil paint. So he moved from light layers to darker layers, and from opaque to translucent colors. And the luminous quality of the surface is the result of his layers and layers of glaze painting, basically, of all the oil glazes. And a glaze is a very thin, transparent film of color applied over a previously painted surface. And to produce glazes, oil colors are selected for their transparency, and they're diluted with a mixture of oil and varnish. And then glazes give depth to painted surfaces by allowing light to pass through and reflect off of lower levels of paint layers. And so this painting features a lot of sparkling jewels, textiles. There's some furs in there as well in his robe here. And even in the background, you can see the sky is using that atmospheric perspective, which helps to create the illusion of depth in this painting beyond the open window. And this new medium, artists found oil paint helped make their paintings just more realistic. Because of the characteristic of oil paints, artists were really able to take painting to another level with oil paints. And that's why it's been such a favored medium. And I don't know if you've ever had that experience in your life where you get a new tool and you realize it's just so much easier to make really good quality work just because you have such good tools. And this is definitely one of those types of experiences in history where oil paints came out and painting really took off. And it's because of the characteristics of the oil paint. So oil paint can easily be made opaque with better coverage power, or it can be really thinned out and become translucent. So it has a lot of versatility there. It can be opaque or translucent. It also has that slow drying time, which allowed artists to blend really well, so they can blend their strokes of color together seamlessly. And they can also make changes during the painting process really easily. So if they make a mistake, they can easily fix it. And then they change very little after they dry. Although the linseed oil does yellow over time a little bit, but that can be fixed if it's just cleaned. And they're also flexible. So in the 17th century, Venetian painters started painting large pictures and replaced heavy wood panels with canvases stretched on wooden frames. So not as heavy to move around if you have a canvas. And that's the advantage of canvas. It's lightweight. And you can also take it off of the frame and roll it up and move it through small doorways. And then if you have a giant painting on a canvas, you can easily unroll it once you get it into the room and put it on a support, a frame, wooden frame support and then put it back on the wall. So oil paint can be applied thinly or thickly, wet onto wet or onto dry. So applied thickly, it's called impasto, a variation of the word paste. So if you're using oil paint thickly, it's called impasto. When a work is wet onto wet, it's called direct painting method. And it's completed if it's completed in one sitting as well. So we'll take a look at a piece here in a minute by Tom Woodall. Rembrandt's Indulgence was Van Gogh's Dilemma from 1991, and he uses the direct painting method in his piece here. So wet onto wet, completed in one sitting, is the direct painting method. So we're going to take a look at that. It's a small work, it's only 4 inches by 3 inches, direct painting method. He does use impasto, so very thick paint near the top of the work. And then the yellow paint is thinned by turpentine, so it's not as thick. And then smooth brush strokes in the middle heighten trompe l'oeil quality. So trompe l'oeil is very hyper-realistic. So he's basically testing the properties of the oil paint. So we see the texture of the canvas at the edges, covered with white ground. And then the artist built up the layers of impasto near the top of the work, so very thickly applied paint. And at the center is a detailed depiction of a metal pitcher, similar to the one the artist saw in a painting by Rembrandt. And in this portion, he really smoothed his brushstrokes and tried to make it as realistic as possible, which is kind of a trompe l'oeil. That's what trompe l'oeil means, it's very realistic. And he titled the work after 2 historical artists, Rembrandt and Van Gogh, whose treatment of oil paint was very innovative. So in this tiny work, it shows us the wide range of the capabilities of the medium. So another artist was Elizabeth Murray, and she's a leader in oil painters breaking out of the box. So she's not using the rectangular canvas anymore. So we're going to take a look at Bop by Elizabeth Murray, 2002 through 2003, oil on canvas. So 9 feet 10 inches by 10 feet 10.5 inches. So it's fairly large. And she's one of the first artists to move away from the rectangular canvas. And she painted on irregular shapes that she bolted together into these whimsical creations. So a lot of irregular surface, and she kind of titled the style of her painting after a style of jazz music that kind of matches the personality, I guess. And she was fond of using subject matter from her daily life. That was one of the things that she liked a lot, so definitely inspired by jazz. So we're going to talk about acrylic now. So acrylic paint is an invention of the mid-20th century, so it's a relatively new material. The binder that holds the pigment is an acrylic polymer, a synthetic resin that provides a fast-drying flexible film, and then the water is vehicle. So this is synthetic, and that's why this is a new type of pigment. And it's less toxic than turpentine, the water is, so it's just more convenient because it's not toxic. And they adhere to a wide variety of surfaces. Colors that the colors maintain a high degree of intensity, and unlike oils, acrylics don't really yellow with age. And they do dry rapidly, which restricts blending and reworking. So if you make a mistake with acrylic, it's a little bit harder to fix than if you made one with oils. So they have that rapid dry time that makes them a little bit more difficult to work with and blend. And like I said earlier, acrylic paints use water as a vehicle, which is not as toxic as turpentine. And it's easier to clean up. You can just rinse it under the sink with regular water to remove it. So we'll take a look at a piece by Young-E Min, Into the Sun, number 10 from 2013. Acrylic on linen, 72 inches by 84 inches. Here it is. It's very simple, but you can see the interesting colors that you can get with acrylics. And it's really a very simple piece. She's using kind of a squeegee here to create this piece. and layering it in certain areas so you can kind of see through this white color. So she's just experimenting with the color and the medium itself and using a large squeegee to create blocks of color here. So let's see how far we are here in this recording. Okay, we can keep going. So we're going to talk about contemporary approaches. There have been several times over the last few decades when people have wondered whether painting might actually become obsolete or extinct. Yet it still flourishes, and artists are still discovering new types of paint, and they continue to find new ways of integrating it, even with the digital world. And new ways of painting, basically. So we'll take a look at John Sabra. Recovers poisonous sludge from streams in Ohio, and then he creates his own pigments from the poisonous sludge out of the streams, and then he creates his own binders and vehicles, and he makes his own paint, and then he creates these really interesting pieces with interesting color palettes because he's made the paint himself from poisoned streams. And the compositions are mostly abstract. And he wants to create commercial quantities eventually from the poisonous streams to try and actually clean the streams up in Ohio, because Ohio has a lot of mining going on. So the coal mines have really leached out a lot of toxic iron oxides that pollute the streams. So he actually recovers this from the stream to make this pigment. And then he actually makes his own paint with its own binders and vehicles. And he actually makes oils and acrylics. And it's kind of limited color palette, but it has a lot of luminescence, and we can see that in this piece called Chroma SI 17 from 2014. It's mixed media on aluminum composite panel, so it's 36 inches in diameter. And so they're actually trying to make these in commercial quantities, like I said earlier. And the money that they make is used to clean up the streams and where the paint actually comes from in the first place. So it's actually got a really good reason behind it too, to try and clean up some of the coal mine industry's mess, basically. In recent years, many painters have used airbrushes to apply acrylics, oil, and other types of paint. So an airbrush is a small-scale paint sprayer, and it's capable of projecting this fine, controlled mist of paint. And graffiti artists, often use this. And it has a really even paint application, so you can't see the brush strokes like you could if you were using a brush. So airbrushes are really good at creating subtle gradations of color. And they use airbrushes or spray cans, because graffiti artists do, because they're able to get the paint out quickly so that they can evade law enforcement. So they have that quickness of execution going on. I think we can keep going. Sorry to check so much, but. So Kelty Ferris uses spray guns to finish most of her works. So we'll take a look at some of her pieces. Orion. So several layers of hand brush patches and then sprayed dots. And so creates kind of a jarring vertical mixtures. So here we can see this. She uses spray guns to finish most of her works. In this painting, she creates several layers of hand brush patches and then sprayed dots, along with a few thin undulating strokes. And the layers that she builds up are different in color or texture, which creates these jarring vertical mixtures. And she often uses acrylic and oil together. So to her, painting is most exciting when it has some notion of touch and texture, and it's the human element of abstract work. By contrast, spray paint is about complete lack of touch. So she's painting with a machine on top of my more handmade marks, is what she would say. So she likes the blend of the handmade marks with the machine marks. And this actually comes from a series that she created titled after constellations from the night sky. So this one's called Orion. And so that's kind of more of a contemporary artist's use. And she's using a modern instrument called the airbrush. And I think that will probably wrap up our video for now.